Oh, hello. Welcome back to Media7's Crowds and Community Special in association with Webstock and Internet NZ. This and this are part of NZ Mint's commemorative Star Wars series, and they're kind of cool. I'm in conversation with Slashdot founder Rob Melder and Twitter's Application Services Chief Rafi Krikorian. Now, fandom, the kind of thing that brings us stuff like this, existed long before there was an internet, but the internet has not only given fans the means to connect, but the tools to act. Jose Barbosa looks at a remarkable project involving fandom's Sistine Chapel.
When people talk about cultural phenomenons, Star Wars really fits the bill. And that's because fans of the films number in the millions. And as decades wear on, love for the films has only increased. But it's not just nerdy benedictions here. These fans really want to participate. But recently, that desire has reached an ambitious climax. 3 years ago, this bloke split the film into 473 15-second pieces and put them online. In 3 days, all the pieces had been reserved. The result was a fascinating crowdsourced remake called Star Wars Uncut. And one of those 15-second clips was claimed by this New Zealander. How long did it take to make that 15 seconds?
About a day, I think. I did it in a 3D application called Maya, and I just downloaded a model of a Star Destroyer and chucked a cardboard texture on it. And then I coloured in a planet and scanned all that and put it in the background, and then I got some fire and some smoke and composited that on the back of it.
Have you seen the whole movie?
Yeah, it looks cool. It looks really fun. And it's kind of interesting to see the different sort of styles that it plays out in. Some of them are really cool, some of them are super cheap. But it all plays together quite nicely from what I've watched.
The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
When I was about 5, we drove from Queenstown to Invercargill to see it at the movies because they didn't play it in Queenstown then. And I had to sit on a pillow so I could see it properly. And I remember the opening crawl, even though I couldn't read, someone was like, "Don't read that because it ruins the whole film." But it turns out it didn't.
After an exhaustive search, we found the one person in all of New Zealand and parts of Tasmania who saw the film in the 70s here at the Civic in Auckland, and they thought it was unmitigated bullpucky.
And we went along, got our tickets, sat down, had good seats. The movie started, and in those days there was an intermission. And I think we got up, went out, I can't remember whether I got an ice cream or not, but I just couldn't stand sitting through the other half of that sort of movie. I just didn't like it, so we left and went home. I go to the movies to be entertained, and I didn't find it entertaining. I just found it ridiculous, and that type of movie just does not appeal to me.
Did you at least find Harrison Ford attractive?
Was he in it?
Yet Julie was ahead of her time, because in recent years the followers of Lucas have rebelled against their master. The Lucas-directed prequels to the original trilogy are widely regarded as abominations among Star Wars fanboys.
No, no, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you.
And the hate reserved for their former silver-haired god is an unsettling combination of the Promethean and Freudian.
I'm gonna go back to 1994 and kill George Lucas with a shovel.
It's even spawned a whole documentary.
Star Wars just didn't, I think, take care of the people who loved it so much.
You can get sniffy about Star Wars all you want, but I think it's a cultural artefact in its own right, and I think it's worthy of study. What does its popularity tell us about the way we interact with our fiction in the 21st century? Why do we have the biologically redundant need to respond to merchandising? And what does it tell us about the way we find other people who like the same stuff? And why is that important?
Never let it said we don't cover the important issues on this program. Now, Rob, you did like Star Wars, and you recently raved.
Do you did?
Yeah, well, when you saw it. You raved about Star Wars Uncut on your blog. What did you like so much about that project?
All right, so I'm a crazy Star Wars nut, and I even saw the re-release of Episode 1 like 48 hours ago in the theater. watching the uncut thing really shows you what is awesome about both fandom and the internet. We're at this crazy point where technology has made it possible for anybody to get a camera, and anybody can shoot 15 seconds. You can do it in any style you want. You can do rotoscoping. You can do that guy in your clip used Maya to do a 3D segment. Other people just covered their kids in tinfoil and cardboard boxes. Only something like Star Wars is going to, well, all right, and Star Trek. We won't get into that holy war. Only something like these things creates that kind of passion, but it takes the internet in order to make it actually possible. So creativity often comes from an individual, but the internet actually made it possible for a community to come together and do hundreds of 15-second individual creative bits and turn it into something that, I mean, if you watch this thing, it's charming. If you even are remotely interested in Star Wars, if you sit through this whole 2-hour thing, you will find a number of clips there that would just, they'll make you feel happy.
But that is, it has to be said, a derivative work, which internet fan communities are great at. We have the whole, the fanfic and everything like that. Yeah. Is crowdsourced creativity of new works, does it work so well on the internet? I
don't think in general.
Why?
Well, creativity doesn't work as well by committee anyway. You talk about how TV shows are written, by rooms of people, but if you have one really good writer writing from a really strong voice, often that's better. You get a more unified vision. You get an individual position. I think there's something stronger about that. You look at something like Star Wars. Yeah, the uncut thing. It's derivative. The joy in that is the fact that hundreds of people threw their heart into their little tiny piece of it, but none of them could have written that movie. It takes somebody who has a vision in order to create that original 2-hour block. Now, there's places on the internet where people have done creative things, but generally what actually ends up happening is they're not voting on individual lines of dialogue. They're not voting on story arcs necessarily. There are individuals within those communities, I think, that tend to just be a little bit more dominant. But that's not even true, or that's not just true of media. That's true of, community-driven websites, of all of these different forms of media. It's individual voices within a crowd.
Where else do you think crowdsourcing works well? Where does it work best?
I've always thought that it worked really well on Slashdot. But if you take a crowd, then you're sort of stuck with this weird problem, which is a crowd is simultaneously an unruly mob and a bunch of geniuses, and you have to build systems and tools in order to sort it out and figure out the difference.
Now, Rafi, we have an interesting local example of a large and disparate crowd of people working towards a single goal around the EQNZ hashtag, which appeared almost immediately after the first earthquake in Christchurch. It became the default for everyone, for government and official services as well. It wasn't the official hashtag to start off with. Do you see that happen elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of examples of different type of national disasters or different types of calling points where people sort of conglomerate into one hashtag. So there's an example in California where a gas main broke, sort of decimating a small portion of a town, and then emergency response people came on board and tried to sort of corral people to use one hashtag. So people would start retweeting about sort of the San Carlos fire, and then the emergency response officials would piggyback along with that to try to really amplify the voice of people on the ground, especially since people on the ground are usually the first ones to show up and they're coming along later. So it happens all the time where everyone's trying to form a uniform mass to have a really big voice.
So a small crowd forms and then a bigger crowd forms as people try and follow that small crowd.
Yeah, and you can even see it over time. So the small crowds are being really active, and the larger crowd comes aboard to just really try to distribute that message even further, either through retweets or by probing it, by asking mentions into that crowd to figure out what's going on.
Now, hashtags on Twitter themselves were a user invention, weren't they? People came up with this because they needed ways to aggregate.
Sure. Chris Messina a friend of mine actually created it and started just tagging sort of tweets with it. He actually asked, is this even a good concept? I think that was his tweet. And one of the first examples was, I think, the fires in San Diego, where the person covering on the ground was actually trying to get people to conglomerate around that, which sort of put San Diego fire on the end of all his tweets. So yeah, it's just a prime example of if the platform doesn't give people a way to do it, they sort of invent it as they come along.
So hashtags are so user-driven, why does it not descend into chaos?
Because I think the users are trying to have their voices heard. So Twitter's biggest thing is just how do you get discoverability? How do you find the signal from the noise that's within Twitter? And people really are trying to either game the system or try to amplify their voice by putting that hashtag there. That's how our search works. That's how our discovery page works. A lot of it is keyed off this one construct. So people are realizing that and want to use it as a way to sort of drive themselves up.
It's Darwinian.
Now, Rob, on Slashdot, you quite quickly got to a scale where you need to do a really difficult thing with big crowds, and that's moderation. And you came up with the famous Slashdot moderation system, in which people were drafted or dragooned in to take care of themselves. Yeah, it was like jury duty, yeah. How did you come up with that?
I wish I could say that there was some sort of overarching plan, but it really was just a long series of iterations. You see a problem, stimulus response, and the initial problems was that there were people being jerks, and how do you deal with that? And when there's 500 posts, all right, I can read 500 posts, it's a lot, but I can read 500 posts. When there's 5,000, all right, I can't do that anymore. So you have to start figuring out ways to ask for help. And then you ask 10 of your friends to do it. Well, eventually your 10 friends get bored, so that you ask 100 friends to do it. And then eventually 90 of them get bored, and one of them turns out to be a jerk. And so he's just going and ruining it for everybody. So each step of the system, we're just adding another layer to figure out how to deal with, boredom or malice or, one problem at a time until it gets to where it is. And when I left Slashdot, the system had basically been the same for several years. Pretty much solidified around the way it works. And it's one of the few systems where anonymity and pseudo-anonymity coexist in a happy way.
Well, it looks complicated, but I must say the principle is very simple. Thank you, Rob Melder and Rafi Krikorian, and thanks again to Webstock and Internet NZ. That's our broadcast show. But wait, there's more. We'll be continuing this discussion for an extra half-hour special available online. So we'll catch you on the tally for next week's Media7 or on the internet for more crowds and communities. For now, goodbye.